I'm thinking the next...
You're live.
Oh, you're live already?
Yep.
All right.
So we just have to wait for it to show up there.
On the event, right?
We're live.
All right.
Thanks everyone. If you can confirm that you can hear me on the live stream. Jonas, can you look and see if on the screen if they can hear me? Has anyone?
I don't see anyone responding, but...
All right, test
Mike
1,
is
2,
watching.
3.
It says just Mike is watching.
Test 1, 2, 3. Mike, can you see if on yours if it's
Yes, there's a
working?
bit of a delay, but it's good.
Okay, perfect.
Did Helena send? Oh, she said she responded. Oh.
All right, so we'll get started. Welcome everyone to our event. We have tonight as our speaker, Brother Moji Aga. He's an Iranian-American Sufi monk dervish, bilingual poet writer, including a Quit Smoking Naturally book. He's the founder of Circles of Nonviolence Community Collaborative Initiative, which is endorsed by Noam Chomsky and Karen Armstrong. So without further ado, would you like me to finish the introduction?
Well, if you say there's some of the organizations maybe I've known.
Okay. Let's start again because then I can edit out the beginning for you.
Okay.
Does that work? Okay. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. This is the first one we're doing. Okay. Welcome everyone to our event today. We have Brother Moji Aga, who's an Iranian-American Sufi monk dervish, bilingual poet and writer, including a Quit Smoking Naturally book. He's the founder of Circles of Nonviolence Community Collaborative Initiative, endorsed by Noam Chomsky and Karen Armstrong. He has extensive education and experience in cultural psychology and conflict resolution, 40 years of peace, justice, human rights, democracy, interfaith dialogue, and Mother Earth activism. He's the founder of many nonprofit organizations and projects like International Institute to Study Climate Change in the Islamic World and Universal Coalition for Interfaith and Intercultural Knowledge and Action. He's traveling the U.S. since May of 2013 in his 1997 Nonviolence Mobile as a peace pilgrim.
That's good.
All right, thank you very much, and introducing Moji.
Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sister Marisa. Thank you, Brother Mike, for doing the hosting and you the co-hosting. Thank you, Brother Richard of the Circle here in Phoenix, which is hosted by this wonderful house of worship called the Quaker Friends Meeting House of Phoenix, whose social concern, Peace and Social Concern Committee is a sponsor, a host of the Circles of Nonviolence Community Collaborative of this area, and we actually devoted this meeting of the Circle to the topic of real Islam versus Islamophobic propaganda, because of the importance of the topic and the timeliness of the need for people to be educated about what real Islam is, as opposed to the portrayal of the religion and the culture onto what I call weapons of mass stupefaction, weapons of mass distraction, i.e. propaganda. And so anyhow, I think it's quite important for people to, especially people who are non-Muslims, to become familiar, first of all, themselves, but also for them to be able to then talk to other people. Because the number of Muslims in the United States is just a couple million, 2 or 3 million. So even if all Muslims in this country were not scared right now and were out there and advocating peace and justice and environment and human rights and interfaith dialogue and letting people know about Islam, there's 3 million people. So there's a need for, we have a 330 million people population of the United States. So we need non-Muslims to become activated in order to do what was done what wasn't done in Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, a lot of good Germans stayed silent about Jews. So anyhow, I don't want to get too dark, but these are pretty dark times, and we're dealing with Islamophobia that is being purposefully fomented in order to demonize the people over there. Over there is where a lot of oil and gas is, and where the empire or the military-industrial complex regularly invades in order to make sure that those resources are made available readily and cheaply. So in order to invade those countries, you need to demonize the populations. In the old days, this is the political subtext of what Islamophobia is about. In the old days, the enemy was the communism, so communism was the bogeyman. Is that how it's pronounced? Bogeyman?
Boogeyman?
Boogeyman? Okay. And now it's the Muslims. And basically for the same reason. Colonial conquest. Empire conquest. So Muslims are the enemy of choice right now. They need to be demonized. So there needs to be a lot of propaganda in order to misrepresent what Islam is, so that when the next country, are we back?
Yes, we're back.
Do we have that lady, the Sister Halima, on?
Not yet.
No? Okay. Sorry, folks. I think the next time we should do YouTube Live, because I've seen a bunch of YouTube Live things. It seems to be easier.
It's just that the app crashed,
Okay.
so it's okay.
All right.
The same thing can happen with YouTube, actually. You're good.
Okay, so I can continue?
Yes, you're live.
All right. So welcome back. Sorry for the technical difficulties. And I'm not sure how many people are watching this, but anyhow. So going back to what I was saying is the next country to be invaded, or the preparation for invasion of it or attacking of it, is Iran. Which is why the Trump administration is happy to have on Friday in Iran there's going to be a very important presidential election, and the choice is between, if you will, Hillary and Trump. So the Trump of Iran, if God forbid get elected, would give the Trump of the United States the excuse that he needs. So anyhow, in this context, we have Islamophobia, and the basic idea, and I'll make this, I give a 10-minute introduction, then I'll open this to dialogue and questions. The basic idea is they say Islam is not a real religion. It is a political ideology, and you may have heard that on Fox News and other weapons of mass stupefying. And behind the idea of Islam is not a real religion, it's instead a political ideology, is to deprive Muslims, especially in the West, in the quote-unquote Christian West. So if they are targeted as a minority that doesn't have a real religion, then they can be very easily demonized as terrorists because they have a violent political ideology, not a real God-sent religion. So when you hear that word, that Islam is not a real religion, that's code word. The same kind of thing was used in Nazi Germany against Jews. They said Jews are not, they don't have a real religion. It's a satanic cult, which is now they say about Muslims. They say Muslims are satanic and they are hellbound, therefore. So when you hear that term, those of you who are watching me, please beware that that's a political agenda. There is a political agenda behind that which appears to be, oh, this is not a religion, it's a political ideology. We should then confront the extremists. And we don't have a problem with, they say, we don't have a problem with moderates. Now, I'm a Sufi. I guess my picture should be next to moderate Muslim in any dictionary, if there were to be one. But I am very mindful of not become the good Jew. In Nazi Germany, when they were before the oven phase, sorry for the gruesome imagery, before that phase, when they were targeting Jews of an area, they would say, we are only going after bad Jews, the money-grubbing Jews. Good Jews, we don't have a problem with. Very important to make that distinction and understand when they say, where are the moderate Muslims? Why aren't they confronting terrorism that is being done by ISIS, for example, the so-called Islamic State? First of all, moderate Muslims have been, from the get-go, have been saying terrorism is not Islamic. It is actually anti-Islamic. But those moderate Muslims are not given the platform to say, no, the word Islam itself means peace. And I forgot to say to our Muslim sisters and brothers who are watching, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum means peace be upon you. Peace be upon you. And the kind of peace we are talking about is inner peace as well as outer peace. And so the answer is alaikum assalam, and peace be upon you. In other words, an exchange of peace, a wishing of each other to have inner peace as well as outer peace. So anyhow, and then the other thing that I usually open these lectures or these talks with, and Muslims start all kinds of events with, is a phrase that I say it in Arabic first and I'll translate it in English. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Now that means the most merciful, the most compassionate are the two highest names of God or Allah. Mercy and compassion. And that phrase is at the beginning of every single chapter in the Quran. Quran has 114 chapters. 113 of them begin with this. The other chapter has this in the middle. The other one begins with Alif Lam Nun, which is a anyhow they say they have it has mystical significance. So the most often repeated verse of the Quran says, God is the most merciful and the most compassionate. So people then, when they want to demonize Muslims, they go and take a verse from some chapter that is describing a particular war at the time of Prophet Muhammad, where the Muslim communities were being persecuted, and they had to defend themselves against the invaders. Therefore, in the Quran says, you're allowed in self-defense to kill those people. So in the Quran as a narrative of history also. Quran is something that has a lot of history in it. So they go and they take one verse, kill the infidels, so to speak, and they take it out of its historic and all kinds of contexts, political, historical, cultural, even ecological context. And then they say, see, that's what Islam is. And they don't say every chapter of the Quran begins. Now, if you were to write a book and you were really trying to make a point, wouldn't you put it at the beginning of if you were to put it at the beginning of every single chapter of the book, wouldn't that, when somebody did a book review of your book, wouldn't they say, wow, this author really wants to emphasize that point, right? So 114 times, in the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, at the beginning of every chapter. Then they say, Islam is not a religion of peace, when the word itself means peace. So anyhow, I could go on and on. I just finished this little introduction with one verse. By the way, I am talking as a quote-unquote lay Muslim. I am not a theologian. I am not a preacher. I'm a Sufi monk or dervish, which means no preaching, no proselytizing. And so I am speaking as a person who is like most of the people who are watching this broadcast or sitting, regular people who may have an understanding of their own religion, if they have any such belief, that is. So anyhow, one of the verses of the Quran, and the other night, Brother Mike was saying, why don't you get the exact verse and the exact chapter and cite it? And I said, I don't want to go down the path of I am the expert. First of all, because I'm not. Oh, hello. Oh, we have one of our members of the circle. Do you know that we've devoted this meeting to the Islamophobia?
I'm not sure. I've been through everything.
Okay.
So
Okay. That's okay. That's okay. So that verse in the Quran is says, La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. Now, no compulsion in religion means you cannot force people to believe something they don't want to believe. It's a universal fact You cannot force people to believe, especially at the heart level, that's where religion is, to believe something they don't want to. So you cannot impose religion of Islam or any religion. So that verse, La ikraha fid-din, there is no compulsion in religion, is something that is foundation of religious freedom and religious diversity. If you can't impose religion, therefore people are free to believe, to worship God, or to believe what they believe. So it's the foundation of the American constitutional recognition of freedom of religion. So this particular verse, La ikraha fid-din, is a general statement. If the religion itself cannot be imposed, can the rules that are supposedly of that religion, can they be imposed? Obviously not. One is a subset of the other. The major thing is no compulsion in religion. You cannot impose. Therefore, you cannot impose women to wear hijab. And you know the nonsense that the tribalistic, the patriarchal nonsense that in many Islamic, so-called Islamic societies is masquerades itself as Islam. If you impose on women that they have to cover their hair and other stuff, then you're going against the actual, there is no compulsion in religion. Now, you of course don't hear this on Fox News. And the Fox News doesn't invite me to come and explain this. Why? I'm using Fox News as just one example of the weapons of mass stupefaction, weapons of mass distraction, weapons of propaganda. So instead, Fox News says Muslims are terrorists. And I'm saying, wait a second. When a religion is, first of all, its name means peace. And the highest names of the God, same God, by the way. There is only one God. There is no other game in town. There is one universe, one creation, therefore one God. That's Islamic theology right there. So when a religion, the highest name of that God is, the highest attributes of that God is mercy and compassion, in Christian terminology, love, then they say Islam is not a real religion and it's not of peace, it is it's a terroristic satanic cult. So you see the difference. Anyhow, here's my little introduction, and so let's open this to questions or even I've heard whatever you may ask. So please don't be shy about even asking either quote unquote stupid sounding questions or ignorant sounding questions. I've heard them all. So but anyhow, say what's on your mind and what are some of the questions that you have. I already saw a hand here.
So,
What's your name?
Carla.
Hi, Carla.
Hi, everyone.
And I'll repeat your question so that people can.
Well, I've been observing a lot of people I know that are Christians, so this is more of a comment than a question.
Okay.
Everything I've been reading, and I've known what you've been saying. I haven't known everything. everything of what you said, especially about the Quran, but I have alternative sources that I try to learn from, and it seems like the Christian religion is so in cahoots with the government that, all the money that goes from Christian churches and the taxes are paying for the wars. And I think that is causing, a lot of the conflict, the power, the misuse of power through, perpetuating war at the expense of human lives, whether they're Muslims or whatever. And so that's just been my observation. And my Christian friends or people I know who are Christians are extremely afraid of Muslims.
Yes.
And it's sad. Very sad that people believe this stuff without really researching.
Thank you. Well, let me, the basic import of Sister Carla's comment was that there are a lot of people who call themselves Christians and are afraid because of the collaboration between those who have power and some people who call themselves Christians and some Christian churches. And they use that kind of demonization in order to justify war. So I want to, because I am a Sufi, therefore I am a Jew and a Christian and I'm Hindu, and Sufis are weird in that they radically believe in the oneness of God. Therefore, Christian, Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, whatever, these are just different shirts that we wear. Our consciousness wears different shirts. So it doesn't matter that what's inside is important. So anyhow, a lot of people, and I've had the misfortune of having been exposed to their violence, religious violence and even verbal and somewhat physical, who call themselves Christians. And I say there is for the same reason that the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, that calls itself a Christian organization. In the same way that they are, in my opinion, not Christian, so when Islamic State, quote unquote, Islamic Caliphate or a state, does horrible things and they say, we are Muslims, I say, So there are a lot of people who call themselves Christians, but their conduct is contrary to every precept of what Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, is about. So we need to make a distinction between those who claim to be of a religion and then they do horrible things in the name of that religion and that religion itself. So thank you for that wonderful comment that there's a very, very sad fact that right now a lot of people who call themselves Christians do not bother to apply the golden rule to Muslims. The golden rule, do not do unto others what you don't like to be done to yourself. And those Christians, and I've been in some of those churches, by the way, they say we Christians have been persecuted over the centuries. And they don't see that when Muslims are being persecuted, it's the same thing. So, very important to make a distinction between what a real religion or even a political belief or whatever, the substance of it is different than how people who claim to believe in that would behave. And then they would say, oh, I am doing this because God said so. They use God in order to advance their own agenda. And a lot of hatred and misunderstanding and racism comes out of that. Let me tell you one example. When I was up in North Dakota, as you may or may not know, I was up at Standing Rock for a couple of months in November and December to empathize with my native sisters and brothers. And I heard a word from the mouth of a babe, essentially, an 18, 19-year-old young lady who spoke at a town hall. And she said, I am so tired, and she's a Sioux native. She said, I am so tired of being looked at, and I'm tired of being called prairie, excuse the term, prairie nigger. And I hadn't heard that word. However, I have been called sand nigger. I don't know whether you've heard that term before. But Muslims or people from the Middle East or over there are called sand nigger by the same people who call Native Americans prairie nigger. And some of them say, we are chosen by God. We are real Christian. And I'm saying, no, you're not Christian. Because you're violating the most fundamental precept of Christianity, that is the golden rule. Love thy neighbor. Love thy enemy. Forget about love thy neighbor. Love thy enemy. Same thing as said in the Quran. Love thy enemy. Different terminology, but same meaning. Anyhow, any more thoughts? Yes.
Earlier you said something about religion being like voluntary, like basically you make your own.
No compulsion in religion.
Right. So, like with Islam, like basically like anyone could like read the Quran and come up with their own interpretation. So is there any such thing as like real Islam? And I mean there is some level of objectivity, I'm sure, but how much is up for?
The answer is yes, and some context. Yes, Islam, the only thing that to join the Islamic community, the only thing you need to do is recite Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, I profess that there is no God but God, and Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and I profess that Muhammad is a prophet of that God. That's all you need to do in order to join the Islamic community. Once you said that, then you are a Muslim. Then you have the responsibility then to read the reader the Quran. The word itself, Quran, means the reader. So the book is called The Reader. Like, duh, read it. Why read the Quran? You say you're a Muslim, so you read the Quran. So once you begin reading the Quran, you see, wow, every chapter begins with, in the name of God, the most merciful and the most compassionate. Therefore, the values of mercy and compassion must be really, really, really important. Right? So there are certain things that you end up, you have the freedom to believe or not to believe. Those who say, kill the infidel, they are misrepresenting, misunderstanding, politicizing. You cannot You cannot persecute people just because they don't believe what you don't believe. Why? Because the Quran says there is no compulsion in religion. And God is the most merciful, the most compassionate. You get a clue, folks. Compassion and mercy are the most primal names of God. Therefore, read the Quran and learn how to be compassionate and how to be merciful. So, if I understand your question, whether when people make their own interpretation, is that still Islam? Is that basically what your question is?
Sort of, yeah, just like, is it possible to say what real Islam is? I mean, I think you gave a pretty decent answer,
Well,
it's open to interpretation, but if you...
There are certain
fundamentals.
There are certain basics. And one basic in chemistry, there are 10 elements to the periodic table. So if you study chemistry and you are a chemist, you're supposed to know those elements, right? You can't say, oh, I'm a chemist, except I don't recognize there is an element called hydrogen. If you said that, then there is something weird about your chemistry. So real Islam, there are certain basics that people need to understand, and if they choose to apply. The golden rule is something that, although it's called the rule, but in its implementation, you have the freedom. You have the freedom to be a jerk. You have the freedom to violate, to expect to be treated fairly, but do not treat others fairly. So in that case, you can be a lousy Muslim, in the same way that you can be a lousy Christian. So anyhow, that's the real Islam is a bunch of basics that once when a baby is born, that baby and the child cannot become a Muslim, full Muslim, unless if that child understands what they believe. Therefore, like any other religion, there is a date, there is an age for when you adopt the religion. So one of the things that people do, and I know I'm going a little bit further than the purpose of your question, but people say, because my parents are of a religion, therefore I am of that religion. You need to understand God on your own terms. You cannot inherit your parents' religion, in other words. And if you are forced to do so, then either the parents are at fault, because you're a child, if you're forced to do that, then you may have to just to keep, to survive. But La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion as a fundamental basis of human rights, of freedom of religion. So, again, to go back to your question, there is a real Islam, except that if then you say, my understanding of Islam is the real Islam and other understanding is defective, then that's not real Islam. It's like there is only one path to God, others are going to go to hell. You've heard that, I'm sure. Right? Yeah. Some people who call themselves Christian use that. John chapter 6, verse 14. There is no way to join Father except through me, except through Jesus. The real translation is there is no way to reach God without me, not except through me. However, some enterprising priests, they said, let's scare the hell out of people so that they come to our church and be afraid of exploring God's love in other languages. So there are some people who call themselves Muslims who say, our way or the highway. And this Muslim says, that's not real Islam. Anyhow, any other thoughts, feelings, questions, challenges?
Have you seen that? Have you heard of Adam Curtis? Makes movies, documentaries. This English filmmaker. He takes public, like open source, public domain footage and makes documentaries. Okay. He made a new movie called Hypernormalization, and he talks about in that movie. He has another movie before that. He's called Bitter Lake, about how like Governor Lyndon Johnson made a deal with the Saudi royal family and oil, and then his other movie Hypernormalization is about how the United States government propped up and set up a boss, the guy's father, not the guy who's there now, but the guy who's father, from Syria, the previous. Not Bashar Assad, but like
Bashar Assad's father.
Yeah,
Hafiz Assad.
Okay, and then also Gaddafi, and shows how the U.S. government and the Israeli government played a role in order to try to counter Iran. And they set up the suicide bombing movement, and it blew back on them. They went from Sunni to Shia, went back, and they went the other way around. Because they were setting. This shows how the Mossad and the CIA and like the Saudi royal, family, how they played a role in creating a resistance movement based on a misinterpretation of a chapter in order for people to take their lives.
Right.
Yeah. It's a good documentary. It's really popular here.
Okay. Well, one thing that I want to make clear, that in terms of what Israel is doing, I don't have a problem with the state of Israel surviving in that part of the world for the same reason that we cannot undo every creation of colonialism. If we were to undo every creation of colonialism, then the United States government should be abolished, and this land should be returned to its original inhabitants. Okay? So, creation of colonialism, including Israel, including the Saudi so-called royal family, which is the patrons of a cult.
They're all having meetings this week. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Trump is going to Israel
big
and
outcome, yeah,
Saudi Arabia
this week.
Right. So what I want to say is, I don't have a problem with the state of Israel remaining there, because it's for ill or not, it has been established by colonial, not by God, in my humble opinion, but by colonialism. However, the state of Israel needs to behave like a civilized state, not a colonial overlord. So, to the extent that the state of Israel is collaborating with that awful so-called royal family in Saudi Arabia, which is another plant of colonialism, in order to foment war, in order to create mayhem in that region, then I shouldn't be, for one thing, I shouldn't be blaming all my Jewish brothers and sisters for it. I work with Jewish Voice for Peace.
There's plenty of Jews against Israel.
Yes.
Israeli anarchist against the apartheid wall, for instance. Yeah.
Right. So what I'm saying is that the imprint, the pause of colonialism is all over the place. In my opinion, the way to deal with that is through nonviolence. And sometimes I give this lecture, quote unquote, or presentation as Islamic nonviolence. And people say, what? Islamic non-violence? And I'm saying, yeah. Then I begin telling them about some of the stuff that I've said. But in terms of your comment, yes, there are lots of machinations of power.
They want to stay in power, like the medical system, like the pharmacy. They want to stay in power. In order to do that, they make good deals, they control states. Like there's a movie we just saw that we saw not Turkey. It shows how the food companies and the medical companies are paying off every bill. Like they're paying for bills to be made, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I want to stay on topic.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you going to some of the other areas. But let's stay on topic because there may be some people who are watching it. And by the way, do we have any way of getting any comments in case if there is anyone?
We do, and I've asked and I'm paying attention, but so far I don't have any questions.
You don't
from
have
anyone.
any questions then?
No,
Okay.
but I can ask a couple questions that I've been asked recently.
Please.
So one thing that I was asked, because I often, I like to promote peace, especially among different religions, and living in the state of Arizona, it's very important for me that my state respects immigration, respects immigrants especially, and it respects all religions. And a lot of people in Arizona have bought into the propaganda, as you said, from Trump and that entire side of the political sphere. So my question is, one thing that I hear most of the time is that you can never listen to a Muslim say that they're peaceful because in the Quran it tells them that it's okay to lie, as long as it's to move the pursuits of Islam forward, which of course is a caliphate, and that all Muslims that are here are simply here for a caliphate. For one day they get that order and all of a sudden your sword's going to come out and you're going to start chopping everyone's heads off. Can you please break that down
Oh, yeah.
and answer that?
Okay.
How do you respond to that?
How do I respond to that? By being who I am and doing what I'm doing. And let that speak for itself.
Okay.
Okay?
How does someone like me answer that?
Okay. You say, first of all, when you reduce every human being into one belief system,
Collectivism, basically.
right? That's collectivism, and that's the foundation of what happened to Jews in Nazi Germany.
Right.
So those folks who are sensitive, possibly, hopefully, to what happened in Nazi Germany to Jews, you can say, look, when you demonize people and when you say all of them believe in this thing that you believe Islam is, then you're going down the path of a very, very dangerous practice. Now, in terms of the taqiyya, the thing about the Muslims are allowed to hide their real identity. That is something when you are extremely persecuted. That's a strategy that you adopt when you are extremely persecuted, basically for self-defense.
So that's not lying.
That's not lying.
It's
That's just
essentially-
like preserving yourself so that you don't get killed.
It's essentially the right to privacy.
You got it. Yes, it is. Well, it is right to basic self-protection.
So it's like a combination of the right to privacy and self-defense all in one.
Right. Well, but when you bring the privacy, the reason I am challenging that is I want to make that human right to stand on itself, on its own, as opposed to become something called also privacy, because people then other things enter. But people that practice is something that Muslims are allowed to do if they are in absolute danger. Wouldn't you hide certain things. If you were to be going to another, in a hostile environment, and your life or the life of your community was in danger, would you advertise yourself, say, by the way, I am this, so kill me?
Right.
Right? So now, to then say Muslims are here pretending, first of all, when you say all Muslims want to create a caliphate, then what the hell am I?
Well, that's
I don't want to create a caliphate,
I agree.
right?
Yep.
So, you say, go talk to regular Joe and Jane Muslim, regular Moji and Halima Muslim. They want to live a life. They want to, feed their family. They want to raise their children, assuming I had a child.
Mm-hmm.
So then you challenge that idea that you are collectivizing a whole population on the basis of an assumption that you're making, and so you can challenge them. Say, have you done some research? Have you talked with some Muslims? And they usually say no. Have you read the Quran? No. I have read, however, what Reverend so and so said in thus and such church, that the Quran is about swords and stuff like that. So, I mean, you can challenge that kind of racist, Orientalist nonsense. The word Orientalism book was written by a Palestinian Christian scholar, late Professor Edward Said. He wrote this book called Orientalism. Basically, he laid out the foundation of how us versus other comes about. How the Oriental, as the savage, is constituted. Noam Chomsky says the manufacturing consent. How Oriental, as the savage, is constituted so that the Occidental can feel, I am civilized. Therefore, I can make a decision for the savages. So my Native American brothers and sisters, they went through those awful, awful schools. Why? Because the so-called Christians that thought these savages need to be civilized, they had that mentality that we are superior, they are subhuman, therefore we can make decisions for them. So anyhow, so to go back to that thing about the taqiyya, the practice of at times not fully disclosing your identity, that's only for self-defense when you or your family or your community is in dire danger. You cannot use that as a cover for terrorism, in other words. If you do, then you're not a Muslim. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, the second question I get the most often is, Muslims are here because they want to take over our court system and institute Sharia law so that they can subjugate women and put them down and make all the white women their slaves.
Yeah.
And cut off hands for stealing and stuff like that.
Right.
Not let women drive anymore.
Right. Make Saudi Arabia, well, one thing I would challenge such folks, say, how come the U.S. government has such a chummy relationship with the government of Saudi Arabia?
That's a great question.
That's why I'm doing this.
They just gave him a $40 billion yesterday.
Oh God. I heard $100 billion.
Oh yeah, just for weapons.
For weapons.
The day before, yeah.
So they sell oil and then they don't get any money because they have to pay back. That's called the sweet colonial arrangement. You keep your family in power, in exchange you fleece your own country. Mm-hmm. So you ask such folks, okay, if you do care about the if you believe Muslims are coming here in order to take over this country and to do all those awful things, then how come when the government of Saudi Arabia, who is doing that in their own country, how come you don't have a problem with it?
What was that? I didn't hear what you said.
They,
This last one, this last sentence?
They don't hold Saudi Arabia accountable.
How come you have no problem with the colonially installed government of Saudi Arabia, who is doing the same things, i.e. doesn't allow women to drive, let alone vote, and institutes Sharia, so-called Sharia law, by the way, their own interpretation of the Sharia law. We are dealing with different interpretations, different readings. Now, different readings means, how many churches are there in the Phoenix area? Each church has a different meaning, has a different reading of essentially the same text. Right?
And then there's 30,000 copies of that same text that say a bunch of different stuff back from like really, in the copper plates.
Right. But I'm saying that we are sitting in one of those churches here. One of the reasons I like this one is that it is actually quite close to Islam. The Quakers. They really believe they understand the love in Christian love. So you say, hey, even within Protestant denominations, you have different readings. How come you don't allow that diversity of interpretation? You don't extend that Muslims could have reached, could have read the Quran and have arrived at different interpretation. When you have such crazy diversity, not crazy, natural, inevitable diversity. Some of it goes cuckoo into cuckoo Islam or cuckoo Christianity, or whatever. But people end up reading a text that is supposedly the text, and they put their own interpretation on it. Then they impose on it their own cultural practices, their own patriarchal beliefs. So I give him an example. First I tell him, imagine if Prophet Muhammad was not from Arabia. Imagine if Prophet Muhammad was, let's say, Chinese. Wouldn't the Quran be in Mandarin? They would have to say, and they say yes. Because Quran is in Arabic because Prophet Muhammad was from Arabia, right? Okay. Then I say, if Palestine 2,000 years ago was a matriarchal society, wouldn't God be loving enough, first of all, to be God the mother and send a daughter, as opposed to God the Father sending the Son? See?
So you're saying that you believe that decision was made of sending a man versus a woman based on the society that existed at the time?
Because they had good PR.
What's the myth of Marduk and Tiamat?
Okay.
Tiamat was taken out, Marduk and all the other gods slayed her, and that's how they made the galaxy. It's like the creation.
Right. Another example I give, and this applies to all Abrahamic religions, a basic story of how humans came about. God got a bunch of clay or some soil, mixed it with water, made it into a figurine, and then blew some spirit into it to make it move, right? That's called pottery. Right? Imagine if you told 2,000 years ago or 1,400 years ago or 307,000 years or whatever, when Moses was. Imagine if you told them, guess what? There is this thing called DNA. And there is a sperm and ovule and all that stuff. well, people wouldn't have heard it, wouldn't have understood what that is. Therefore, there had to be an absolute simplification of the creation story of the Abrahamic religions, basically as something that when you look at the technology of it, is a technology of pottery. They knew how to make things from pottery. Right? So, another example, both that applies to all Abrahamic religions. Paradise. Paradise is a Persian word. It's basically a really cool, nice garden. Now, West Asia and North Africa is pretty hot and dry. An oasis, a garden, is a really cool place. It's literally cool, right? So, God is trying to communicate in absolutely baby language that the law of karma, if you screw up, if you have bad intent, and from that bad intent comes bad action, then you're going to suffer. The law of karma, which is another way of saying the golden rule, right? So, God is trying to communicate to primitive consciousnesses good outcome. They say, oh, Garden of Eden, paradise, into which flows milk and honey. First of all, how does honey flow in a stream is beyond me. Because usually, anyhow, assuming that honey, didn't God have packaging of milk and honey? Do people have to put, like animals, put their mouth in a stream and drink milk? That's the technology of paradise, right? So, Muslims just wanted to add some incentives, so they threw in 72 virgins. If you take that kind of thing literally, then you go goofy. You need to understand that these texts are to be interpreted intelligently, i.e. hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the science and art of interpretation of text. It began as biblical exegesis. People had to deal with a bunch of words and they had to figure out what these words mean. So now we have this modern science or modern art science, modern knowledge called hermeneutics. So you end up looking at the text and use the brain. God in Islam says, we gave you aql, reason. Use it. Read the Quran, use your brain. Okay? That's basic Islamic teaching. Real Islamic teaching. So, we need to understand that, another example, hell. In West Asia, if you want to really communicate bad outcomes, fire is really, really good. I mean, fire, you're going to burn in hell. Right? Now, so the sun is really, really blazing hot a lot of times, like in Phoenix. If you want to say, really, you're going to get screwed up if you have bad karma, then you say you're going to burn in hell. That's a metaphor. If you take it literally, that there is hell and it has 7 layers and all the nonsense that goes into the imagination of the Abrahamic people who believe in Abrahamic religions. They create stories, narratives, in order to make understandable that which is really difficult to understand. Rumi, the Sufi poet, says, when you speak to a child open the tongue of a child. If you're talking with a child, don't speak in such a way that the child doesn't understand. Simplify your language, simplify your words, even to the baby, you go coo, 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 you know, so that baby goes like that, right? Because the baby then understands. If the baby, you give, philosophical, brilliant philosophy to a 5-year-old, so these texts need to be understood basically properly using the brain. So you read, you then think about it, then you apply it to your own time and space and culture. You don't apply something that happened 1400 years ago to say we need to imitate those behaviors now. If you do that, then you go against the basic precepts of Islam. For example, no compulsion in religion. So you have ISIS, these criminals, who say, we want to go back to your question, we want to implement the Islamic law. They need their own stupid, extremist understanding of what they call Islamic law. And then they say, we want to force people to go to paradise. Actually, in Iran, in today's Iran, they use the term, the so-called Islamic government of Iran. If I go to Iran, I'll be arrested, by the way. But they say, you are too stupid, we're going to drag you to paradise for your own good. And I'm saying, God does not want stupid people in paradise. God wants people who have evolved to become God-like. So those people who say, Muslims want to impose the Sharia law and therefore they have this conspiracy theory of they're here in order to take over the marriage. I mean, then you say, show me another government or another group of people who have done that. And then if they say, I don't know, you can then say, how about colonialism, Western colonialism? Then you can tell them about the history of colonialism, which later got inherited by the United States empire. And you say, so you impose your own savagery onto the Muslims? You did it, therefore you think that they are up to it? I mean, you can do all kinds of things, but basically you need to explain to folks to treat other human beings with the golden rule. Anyhow, I can go on and on. So, beautiful questions. Any other thoughts? Yes?
It's a little off topic.
Comments? That's okay.
But
if it's too off topic, I have to then...
it relates to stuff you said before that's
Okay.
not necessarily related to Islam, but like you said about Israel that like you didn't necessarily have a problem with them stealing land, like what is done type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
But then like the issue with Standing Rock was like the Sioux tribe, or what was the tribe?
A standing rock sutra.
Yeah. They thought they had ownership over the land, but the land had since been like sold off to other people, so who had agreed to have the pipeline go through, but they're like, well, but that's actually our land. But I don't know. Do you have the same type of stance with that? Like, what's done is done, or should?
No, I say we need to resist colonialism the
But
best
like
we
if there's
can.
already a new owner of the property, like should it be taken from them and given back? Or?
Well, if it is possible to restoration, restorative justice is based on the notion of if it is possible to restore before the violation. If it's possible, then do it. If it's not possible, then do the best approximation to create justice, to create coexistence. And and more importantly, just as important, do not use violence in order to correct violence. Because as soon as you use violence in order to resist or correct violence, then you've already lost you've become the savage on the other side.
I guess. But like, what about self-defense? Because like, if you refuse to use violence to protect your property, then you automatically lose.
Okay, self-defense, in my understanding of nonviolence, is part and parcel of nonviolence. As long as it is self-defense.
Protective force and punitive force, that's the difference.
I think that applies to property too. Like, does that do Islam make people in general think that self-defense also applies to property, or just
Copyrights and stuff.
well,
Like
like
intellectual
We don't,
or
let's
just
not
physical
get back
property?
into our libertarian meeting. I know where you're going. I don't want to go into the copyrights.
Well,
Are you just talking
but-
about physical land
yeah,
property?
that's what I was talking about.
Okay,
Let's keep it within that scope.
in the Islamic interpretation, there is a private property is respected. However, it's not necessarily
Doesn't warrant
it's
killing
not
someone.
celebrated. You have the women, for example, were given at the time in Arabia when there was female infanticide among the tribes at the time of Prophet Muhammad, women were given private property rights under Islam. So the private property is my understanding of it is an extension of being able to have a sense of self-control, a sense of control over your destiny. However, you shouldn't fall in love with that which you own, because that which you own, you need to partake of it as much as you need, not what you want. So if your private property is to aggrandize the ego, to then say, look, my house is really large and it adds to my prestige in the community, therefore I can run for Congress. Private property is respectable within Islam as long as it serves God's purpose. In Christian terminology, become Christ-like. Okay?
Yeah, I could have to see how that would be sort of like open to interpretation a little bit compared to other aspects.
Oh, it's at every corner, at every sentence, at every comma is open to interpretation. And it depends on the condition in which you live. A teaching of Imam Ali, the first Imam of the Shias and the fourth Caliph of the Sunnis, said, be the child of your own time. Be the child of your own time means use your brain, apply these teachings to your own condition. Which is why I, as a Muslim, can, if I choose to, can eat pork. The way this thing got started, by the way, let me tell, Brother Mike actually made some delicious pork. And I ate it. And he was like, wow, you ate pork? Yeah. So then, 2 days later, he writes like a satirical comment on Facebook post. I have a Muslim friend who eats pork. Now what? Okay? So then there were some of the most ignorant comments underneath of it but nothing new to me. But some of the ignorant comments that eventually I said, oh boy, we need to have these sessions in order to partake and share some of the true teachings of Islam so that people can distinguish between what real Islam is versus garbage propaganda. So hopefully we're going to have this kinds of sessions more successfully advertised on YouTube Live, hopefully, so that people can... by the way, so far, and please be honest in your assessments, do you believe that what I've said so far is something useful that needs to be heard? Some more?
Well,
You do?
it's useful, but you just mentioned eating pork, and that involves the violence of killing an animal. And I've been a vegetarian who prefers to be a vegan since 1992. So how do you have like circles of nonviolence and then have a situation where you eat dead animals?
Okay. As I said,
That's like, what's that called? Like, they call that halal or something?
well, they say it is halal. Thank you for bringing that word. Halal means it is allowed. It is not necessarily because it is halal, because it is allowed, you need to use your own brain and come to your own conclusion as whether you want it or not. And if you're a child of your own time, and in your own time, in your own community, you realize killing animals in order to eat them is not a cool thing, then as a Muslim, as long as you choose, you then say, okay, I don't eat pork. But back then the rule of not eating pork in Judaism as well as Islam was because of trichinosis. So if the basic reason for why pork was not allowed so people don't get sick, if that problem is solved, then why not? But then that's something that is up to every individual Muslim to make that decision herself or himself.
I think people are still getting sick as the number one cause of death.
Okay, I understand that. And I don't want to go too far off topic.
Heart disease from eating meat.
Okay.
Cancer, colon disease.
Personally, I think anger is the most toxic thing we can put in our body. And yes, killing animals is not good, but if you're living somewhere where there's no farms and you just have animals, you either stay alive or you die.
Well, this, by the way, to bring this back to the topic of Islam, real Islam versus with the propaganda, this would be a wonderful topic within an Islamic community to talk about. And then let people get educated and then let them make their own decision. Do not impose. So those people who say Muslims are here in this country to impose the Sharia law, the so-called Islamic law, that's not Islamic. You cannot impose. As soon as you do impose, then you're not Islamic anymore. You are, patriarchal savage. And people do impose horrible things.
Or in Donald Trump's daughter's case. I've been studying Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka, since way before the election. Because I realized she controlled Donald Trump. She's his top advisor, right? So she's making the decisions for him on a lot of cases. And she's using her governmental power now to get favors in China and all over the world with these, copyrights for her dresses and using favors. That's the fascism, she's a matriarch in a way, right?
Anyhow, there's lots of pressure to go off topic here, and I want to stay on topic. Do we have any comments or questions?
I have a question.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that...
No, we don't have any on the screen.
You don't have any?
I'll interrupt you when we do.
Okay, great. Yes.
I know that a lot of the religious books have been changed to serve political agendas. The Quran probably is one of the few that hasn't changed throughout the years, or has it?
The Supreme Master says Mustafa did it.
There is what?
Mustafa is the guy who came later, like when they were gathering all of Muhammad's writings together.
Oh.
That someone would have the ability to, interpret or a little add political. Well, her name is the Supreme Master of Shanghai, and she has like this restaurant that's all over the world, and there's like 4 of them, 3 of them here in Phoenix. And she said this. She said she went to heaven and talked to Muhammad, and he told her this.
Oh, you mean...
She claims to be the Buddha. But that's what she says.
Okay. You mean the word Mustafi?
She's got millions of followers.
The writers. Okay. The actual text that we see of the Quran in Arabic, it hasn't changed a lot, in part because Muslims realized what had happened to other holy texts, that they had been, written differently or added and subtracted and whatever. So they really tried to keep the same copy without it being altered. So you have then, as a result of being so faithful to try to keep the Quran from being altered, then a lot of Muslims have fallen into the trap of worshipping the literal words of the Quran.
And when new information comes about, that changes everything else you do because it actually applies in some way.
Right, but you need to, within the Quran there are, and I'm not a religious scholar, so I don't want to, speak larger than my mouth, as they say in Persian. Because there are verses in the Quran that are specific to a specific situation. And then there are other verses that have, at a later point, have said that which was said in that verse doesn't apply anymore. So you need to have interpretation, really good interpretation applied to today's condition. So the Quran as a master text, it's like you Google. I joke by saying that reading the Quran is like Google.
Sometimes it's like Trump does that 3 times in one sentence.
Anyhow, reading the Quran is like Googling something. But God help you if the only knowledge that you have comes as a result of just Googling. Right? So you can
trust the source.
You go to a reference text to see what it says, but that text is not the only thing on the basis of which you make decisions. You use the brain, you look at the environment, you look at culture, you look at technology, and then you come up with a recommendation for the Islamic community by the religious scholars in order for people to do accordingly if they choose. As soon as you begin imposing, then you've gone, it's like you say, I'm a Christian, and you just begin killing people for no reason.
Have you seen that movie, Don't Tell My Mother I'm in Iran? And there's this guy. He's like a French director's son, and he wants to go to all these places in the world, like Cuba and Palestine, or anywhere that people aren't really supposed to go, or there's trouble, and make a documentary. And he goes to Iran. He says, "Don't." And all the movies are, "Don't tell mother I'm here. Don't tell mother I'm here." Don't tell mother. So it says, "Don't tell mother I'm in Iran." And he goes and meets like the mullahs and stuff. And he's like talking to them, and they're like buying alcohol and everything. And he's like having a party with them. And I'm like, geez.
Yeah. Hypocrisy
Their
is...
interpretations are why.
Oh, hypocrisy is it?
Yeah, all power leads to abuse. They've done no study in history where someone they've done Stanford study. Power leads to abuse.
In 2007, I took a couple of delegations of American peace activists to Iran. I can't go to Iran anymore because in 2009 they stole the vote, so I said no. And so anyhow, but in 2007 I still could go to Iran, so I took a couple of delegations of American citizen diplomats to Iran in order to just show them and be their interpreter of what they were seeing. And so, anyhow, that's, let's see, what time do we have? We have 8:30, so we have, how much? If you don't have any other, you don't have to go till 9 o'clock, by the way.
Yeah, we have no other questions right now.
You have no other questions right now?
No. What I would like to do though for...
Whoa.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I just wanted to sort of ask, how representative do you think your own beliefs are of Islam in general? And if someone like the Islamophobic things you were saying, if those are true of a large percent, even if it's not real Islam, are their fears warranted?
Are there what?
Are their fears warranted? Even if it's not all Muslims, obviously, but if there's a large enough group.
Basically you're asking, is there a large, although you're speaking of what the real Islam is there a large group of people that claim to be Muslim that are seeking violence? Is that a warranted fear?
Yeah, and how representative do you think your own beliefs are of most Muslims? Do you think most Muslims think like you? Or?
Well, whether they think like me or not, I know that what ISIS has been doing has been condemned by every single mullah, mufti, ayatollah under the sun, including in Saudi Arabia, where ISIS got started. So if you go by the metric of the fatwas or the opinions of religious leaders, then what ISIS is doing is universally condemned. As far as whether what I'm saying is representative of Islam in general, as soon as you say Islam in general, I say, what the hell does that mean?
Like the majority of...
The majority of people who call themselves Muslims.
Yeah.
Okay. The majority of the people who call themselves Muslims want to eat, want to eventually raise a family, they want to have a job. They are not looking for terrorism and adventure. They don't want to seek. So the absolute majority of the 1.5, the absolute majority of the people who call themselves Muslims, they want to live a normal life. However, there are some people who, in part, as a result of colonial savagery, have been pushed to the point of we need to do some horrendous things in order to protect the purity of our quote-unquote religion. So they've been pushed into extremism by the extremisms of other, in this case, Western colonialism. So to the extent that there are absolutely just a few, I mean, when you compare to 1.5 billion people, few thousands at best, doing horrendous things, then the fears are not justified, because especially in the United States, the Muslims who come to the United States, they've become, I don't know, they've become selfish enough to want to live the American dream. Sorry, I'm joking. But the fear is not justified, because in the same way that there are some people who call themselves Christians who buy guns, who amass guns, who are members of the National Rifle Association. But I don't go around, maybe I should, as a Muslim, I should be afraid of them. Maybe I should be living in more fear than I am. But I don't go around, and I come here last Sunday and I see a bunch of people sitting there for 45 minutes and doing meditating, and they're Christians, and then I see other people, and sometimes they ask very, very ignorant questions about what Islam is, but then once they begin to learn about Islam, they say, oops, I'm so sorry. And the other night, I won't disclose who, but I taught a lady who is close to my age how to Google Iran and in images. So she saw for the first time that Iran has streets, that there are some women's sports teams even, and she was blown away. And wow, women's sports teams? She couldn't believe her eyes. So she began learning, so I said, okay, why don't you Google Iran everyday life? And she began by images, and then hopefully she's going to read some and find out that at least in the most demonized country right now in the United States, that is called Iran, people want to live a normal life. However, there is a theocracy that is doing all kinds of horrendous things in the name of Islam, but that's not, in my opinion, Islam. So the fear is not justified. The fear is fomented in order to keep people scared, so that they remain ignorant, so they don't find out, so that then they can when the propaganda comes and tells them those people are savages, we have the right to go invade their country or drop bombs. The mother of bombs was dropped on Afghanistan, as you may remember a few weeks ago.
And the purpose, a bunch of weapons were launched.
Well, but it created a whole lot of terrorists.
Yeah.
It created a whole lot of people who were totally innocent got killed. So if you want to reduce terrorism, first of all, you don't say Islamic terrorism because it's a contradiction in term. But if you bloody people enough, then some people would then say, we want to correct this situation, we want justice. Then they go to some book and they take a verse out of the Quran and say, see, even Quran says, God says we are allowed to do this. So Islamic terrorism is an absolute contradiction in term, as is Christian greed. Do you think there is something called Christian greed?
I don't know. I've thought about that a lot.
I think it's a contradiction in term.
Because you can't be totally non-individualist. But
No, I'm talking Christian.
yeah.
Can
Yeah,
you be?
mathematical way originally, because it comes from Pythagoras. Pythagoras is the one who made these ideas. It wasn't Jesus. Jesus was just following the that person's ideas.
Okay,
about
wait,
what
you're
about-
getting, you're totally
Okay,
getting off
okay.
track.
But it's about not owning things and it's about not speaking. You know, that's what this.
So-
Right. All I'm saying is that if we say Christian greed, it's a contradiction in terms,
It's a healing system.
right? Or Christian, how about Christian cruelty? How about Christian terrorism? How come?
It's not Christ-like, I'd say that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How come when white people do horrendous terroristic acts in this country, they say, oh, it was a mentally ill person. As long as he was white, he was not a terrorist.
Demonize it.
Exactly.
Use it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Lone wolf. Make an enemy image.
Right. It was a lone wolf. It was all
Okay.
kinds of
Because their
justifications.
giraffe ears aren't big enough. That's why.
So I have a question, I have another
Yes.
question for you.
Sure.
To get us back on track. So, another thing that that I'm often get questioned, is, well, Muhammad was a violent person, he waged a lot of war, and that's proof that Islam is a violent religion and that Muslims are supposed to be violent.
Yeah. Okay. The wars, to my understanding, again, I'm not a historian, nor a theologian, nor a preacher. Okay? According to my understanding, the wars that were fought at the time of Prophet Muhammad were wars that were fought because the tiny minority that the Islamic country, the Islamic society was being attacked. So it's wars of self-defense. You cannot, go on a crusade, quote unquote. That's what Christians do. No, I'm joking. You cannot go onto a crusade and impose Islam onto other people.
Do you think there are any other exceptions that the Quran allows violence besides, like, in self-defense?
Like what?
Like homosexuality. Like some Islamic people think it's a crime that constitutes violence.
Okay. Patriarchal societies who in some places pretend to be Christian or are Christianized, in some other times, they're Jewish, they're Muslims, there are other societies. Patriarchal societies have wanted to make sure that marriage is between a man and a woman in order to perpetuate the institutions of patriarchy and male control over female. So to the extent that people are using religious excuses in order to advance homophobic practices or beliefs, that's just because they're ignorant. When people are ignorant, they do all kinds of things. For example, they say, okay, how about another thing that is done in Islamic societies, which I don't think necessarily should be done, it depends on whether it's needed or not, or whether it's wanted or not, is circumcising boys. Right? Circumcising boys was because there was infection as a result of that little skin at the end of the penis. So they said, if we cut this off, then they realized that boys don't get infected.
Infections of death because natural hygiene plan.
Right. But they had difficult. Hygiene was something that was not available to everybody. So as a way of essentially a public health measure.
They lost millions of nerve cells, sensitivity, and self-lubrication.
What about female?
Right.
What about female mutilization?
That's actually
Mutilation?
anti-Islamic. It is not Islamic. It is patriarchal, it is barbaric, but it's not Islamic.
Okay.
To the extent that people in Islamic societies do horrible things and then justify it by saying God said so, well, then you can apply the same thing to all kinds of Christians, Jewish. How about in Burma, Myanmar? You've heard about the Rohingya massacres? The Rohingya Muslim minority whose villages were burned by Buddhist monks. Yeah. Buddhist monk, I'm a Sufi monk. One of my teachers is Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk. So in Burma, a bunch of Buddhist monks went on a rampage and burned Muslims. Was that Buddha's teaching? Think about that. People can do horrible things out of ignorance, out of tribalistic traditions or practices. Then they want to justify it, to say, I'm doing this because I am, we are the chosen people. God said so.
So from your own readings of the Quran, you don't see any permission for violence besides self-defense?
Besides self-defense, no. In the Quran, if you kill one human being, it's as if you've killed all humanity. If you kill one human being, of course, unjustly by definition.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the golden rule sort of contradicts the self-defense thing, because obviously you don't want them to kill you. So
Wait, the golden rule?
Self-defense trumps the golden rule, I guess.
No, self-defense is the golden rule.
Well, I mean, you don't want them to kill you, so you shouldn't kill them.
Right.
I don't, if someone was pointing a gun at me, that's like saying I shouldn't shoot them because I don't want them to shoot me.
Well, if somebody is pointing a gun at you, if you can, run away. If you can, do something else so that they don't. However, if somebody has a knife at your throat, then you should push them away from you. And if that means that you should punch them in the face to do so, that's fine. That's violence that is in self-defense.
And that's more important than the golden rule.
To me, no. To me, it is the golden rule because I don't understand the distinction you're making.
So you want to protect your life, you want to live on. I mean, I think see the yes behind the other, see it backwards, and you'll realize that it's life acts, whatever form of life it is acting in its own self-preservation and would protect itself to continue on its own life. Hopefully, it being aware and conscious of the other, they having as much validity as itself. But not always is that the case.
So again, the golden rule, for example, has multiple, when you take it in context and also based on which translations you're using and what text you're using, there would be different definitions of it versus what the common definition is.
Different exceptions.
Yeah. So in the same way as I would say that within the scope of this conversation, within the same way that of what he has been, what Moji has been talking about, the same thing would apply to that too. So
it's open to interpretation a bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Depends on the specific situation.
Because obviously, it's a subjective rule because everyone.
You would like to use the process of observation, feeling, need, request, mental empathy, but if you can't do that, protective force is something that, and then get back to communicating after, communication can happen again. It's a matter of connection.
Now there is one example of Sinjar in northern Iraq. This is not just a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Sinjar in northern Iraq and Kobani in northern Syria. In Sinjar, the community was wiped out by ISIS. The Izadi or Yazidi Muslims were butchered and their women were taken into sexual slavery. And in Kobani, however, there was a community self-defense, a community, essentially,
Training self-defense.
a community police force. So one community survived, the other one didn't. So, and the perpetrators were the same, the ISIS, the so-called Islamic State.
Yeah.
So self-defense is something that is part and parcel of non-violence. Otherwise you would be encouraging violence. If you don't repel naked violence in self-defense and you get victimized as a result, then you have rewarded violence.
Exactly, I agree. Sorry, I know it's a little off topic of like real Islam and all that. It's just I'm interested in that.
No, that's fine. This is exactly the kind of conversation that one wants to,
Go even further off topic beyond rewards and punishment. Because punishment, punitive force is why people are doing these things, right? They judge something as wrong or right, and then they say, well, I'm justified in my response to that behavior based on how I saw it or how I got handed down to see that. When the reality is it's the feelings and the needs that we all share that are related. Like we all have needs for food, though we might try to get our needs for food met differently. There's ways we can get our needs for food met without causing conflict.
okay. Anyhow, there are different ways of interpreting the suggestions, the Islamic teachings, but we are responsible as Muslims, as humans, to apply the teachings to our own condition. And so, as far as violence is concerned, as I said, in Quran, in Islam, my understanding of it is there is absolutely no violence allowed unless in self-defense. Self or community defense.
Right.
You cannot. Otherwise it would be, killing other creatures of God, which is the same thing as you. When you kill one person, as if you've killed all humanity. Anyhow, it's 9 o'clock and we are officially at the end of our scheduled time. Thank you very much. And so, do you folks want to, I don't know how many people watched this.
Actually, throughout the whole thing, we had people coming in and out. I'd say we probably had about 15 to 20 people throughout the whole thing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we'd have like 2 or 3 people at a time, and then people would come in and out for a few minutes here and there.
Okay. Well, maybe, so you folks feel that it's okay, it would be something useful if we were to continue this? Even though I may have to say the same things, but there's so much need out there. I'm so aware of it.
I would say that this is something that's critical, especially for Arizona. But I would have some recommendations that I talked to you about after as far as the format to make it a little bit more effective. And then also I'd like to ask you to do a special format that's just an online audience that we could prepare and promote that I could talk to you about later. Because I have a large online audience. I don't have a large Phoenix audience.
Okay.
How about getting the message out to the right people too? Because it seems like we probably don't need to hear it as much as maybe some of the people you were talking about. I mean, but how do you reach those people?
Preaching to the choir.
No, but I think it's
Just show up
helpful
in Baptist
though.
churches randomly.
Yeah. I think it's
It's like, what's that called when you like do something like
yeah. I think we can
Are we
also.
off, by the way?
No, we're still on. Do you want to say goodbye?
Well, thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll continue this and stay tuned, so to speak. And God bless you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.